you want to learn, a lot of these students are still targeting vet school. They need the hands-on experience, not just the theory. They need the practice. And so it's just grown over the years, and it's probably one of the most rewarding parts of my job. I love getting to be out there and share my passion with them and see them find new passions or refine their passion. So I think right now we have 35 undergraduates that are involved in every aspect of the research. That's from feeding the animals to health checks to collecting blood. And some of them take on their own research projects and present those on campus or at national meetings for undergraduate research. Some of them have become my graduate students after that. And so I just think that experiential learning needs to be incorporated anywhere we can.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I'm Travis Molyneux, and today I have Dr. Caitlin Cadaret with me. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, it's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah.
So Caitlin and I spent time at University of Nebraska for a few years as she got her master's and PhD while I was on faculty there. So did some really interesting research on stress and neonatal research with sheep. And now Dr. Caitlin Cadaret is at Colorado State University as assistant professor. Does a lot of teaching, does a lot of research, and a lot of undergraduate research as well. So Caitlin, let's start talking about some of your research that you're doing. I'm sure you're still doing some neonatal stuff, some stress research in maybe late or mid gestation. So what are you doing?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, when I was at Nebraska, I got to do some really cool, a little bit more biomedical focused research and trying to improve both livestock and human health. And when I got to Colorado State, I really had an interest in getting back to the producer and how to support producers in that same discipline. So a lot of the research that I have going on here is focused more so on common livestock stressors and what are the thresholds of those stressors that dictate whether an animal can mitigate through a stress by themselves, or maybe we need to consider intervention strategies. And so that work is being done still in sheep, but also in cattle now here at our Beef Improvement Center, looking at a variety of things. So the biggest couple of projects we have going on is looking at kind of the standard extensive rangeland production. That one's in sheep when we're looking at our pregnant animals, we graze them through the winter and supplement them at the end. Is that our best strategy, or how can we best support mom through that? And then thinking about the long-term consequences of nutrient challenge. What does that mean for the next generation from a reproductive standpoint? Their ability to attain puberty, get pregnant, carry a pregnancy, etc. So that's been ongoing for a couple of years. We're getting ready to wrap that up. We do some stuff around common management practices with castration and banding for tail docking as well. And then on the beef side, I'm actually working with our geneticists here to look at some potential developmental origins of cardiovascular disease in the feedlot. Obviously, we're seeing that as a big topic right now. And the fetal programmer in me wants to start at the beginning of the conversation and see if maybe some of our selection practices are kind of setting our animals up to either be better off in the feedlot or we're making them more susceptible to pulmonary hypertension. So that's kind of broadly what we're working on here. Lots of hands in different buckets.
Yeah, lots of cool stuff. So let's go back to some of the sheep research. And I think one of the most needed research areas is this multi-generational effects, right? So we are so prone in academia, and it's really forced by how we're judged and our performance. But is a lot of our studies are one and done. They have to be short. They have to be quick, right? And it doesn't always lead to what producers need, and which is longer term, multi-generational effects of whatever we do.
Yeah.
And so tell us about, I know you're some of that's kicking off, or you're collecting samples now that I just seen. So tell us about some of the multi-generational research you're doing.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of great scientists, like you mentioned, that are really focused on smaller, shorter periods in the gestational time point, early neonatal time point. And so I'm going to let the smart people just take the lead on that. And so when I was rethinking where I wanted to focus as an independent researcher, it's rooted in some of those concepts that we've learned from those types of studies. So we know that if mom is nutrient challenged or stressed, that is going to impact the fetus that's developing, and that fetus has to repartition nutrients to survive. In my little brain, one of the tissues that's probably not prioritized, or one of the systems that's not prioritized, is the reproductive system, because that animal isn't going to need it for a long time. So this generational study is kind of aimed at that. Those are things we can't, use phenotypic data to select for, and it's lowly heritable, so environment plays a huge role. So the generational part of this is simulating an extensive production system in our pregnant ewes, following those lambs out to, like I said, puberty, breeding, the next generation, and looking at reproductive competency from a whole different lens. There's some great early ovarian work. We're looking more at the uterus, the development of the placenta, healthy pregnancies, etc., with the idea that there's a host of ways that we could be seeing multi-generational impacts of maternal stress. That could be epigenetics, that could be persistent environmental influences, or that could be tissue-specific programming of the reproductive tract that, again, there's not a way for a producer to look at an animal and know that. So if we can identify what those are, then maybe we can make some better selection practices, management practices to not inadvertently breed inefficiency into our flocks and our herds.
So let's go back and define stress.
Okay.
And so stresses can be a big thing, right? And it's a multitude of things that could be a stressor.
Yeah.
So what kind of stress are you looking at, and what's your definition of stress?
I think to define stress is maybe challenging, but I think it's in its simplest form, maybe anything that pushes an animal away from homeostasis, right? And that can be an acute stressor that's just short lived, like maybe transport or handling, and that can be more of a chronic stressor that is a persistent environmental influence. So we focus primarily right now, we are focused on nutritional stress. It is profitable and advantageous to winter animals on range for as long as you can. But with that, there's pretty good likelihood that somewhere in there, they're not going to have their nutritional requirements met. So that's one we focus on because it's probably one of the most common ones a livestock animal is going to encounter. We look at heat stress. Here we look at cold stress and altitude also. And then I've done some stuff in the past that's also looked at immune challenge, like illness, and that's work that's also being done here in other groups as well. But yeah, within that, we haven't looked at them specifically, but you could look at things like herd dynamics, transport, early neonatal management. All those I would categorize as stress. And part of that is just the production system and a needed acute stress. And some of that is, should we reconsider the way we're doing some stuff?
Yeah, and it's the challenging part is our environments are so dynamic. And you're talking about cold stress and late gestation, and especially for spring calving cows, is that it's hard to predict, and it's hard to sometimes be able to manage that stress. And in some regards, stress is good, right? And there's a lot of data on good stressors. There's also a lot of data on if we overstress. And unfortunately, on the livestock side, we don't have good maybe good metrics like they do in like human stress physiology, or where people are working out, and that stress is a good thing because their body adapts to it. That's much tougher when we look at that from the aspect of livestock, and how can we make them adaptable to some of that stress that we can always come in and mitigate.
I think it's about thresholds, right? To an extent. How severe is that stress? When is that stress taking place? And how long is it taking place for? Because that's going to dictate how we handle it also.
Yeah, it's I always think back to the bomb cyclone we had in Nebraska, and what
Mm-hmm.
was that, 2020?
Yeah, I think it was right after I left. So I got here in 2019, so that sounds right.
And it's from a livestock or producer standpoint, it happened so quickly. It was so cold, so wet. Things went downhill very quickly, and producers have to be very reactive or proactive, and not so reactive to that. And that those times will have not only impacts on that calf, but could be impacting their herd for multiple generations down, right?
Yeah.
So that's where some of your research can lead us to, is that when these stressors occur, what's the impact to that heifer and her performance in future generations?
And can they come back from that stress or not?
Right.
I think, like you're saying, with the bomb cyclone and the extreme heat events we saw the last couple summers, it's much harder to prepare and respond to those extreme weather events than it is for maybe the more somewhat more predictable stressors. And I don't know that I have a great answer for that one yet.
It is. We always need contingency plans and know what those thresholds that we need to have in our management when something occurs. But sometimes it's maybe one and done events are good or safe,
Yeah.
but sometimes we can't predict one and done, and it's multiple days that's the big negative impact.
Yeah. I think we need some of those studies too that have multiple stressors concurrently happening, because while I might be focused on nutrient challenge or altitude, there's also variable weather patterns and predation and all of that. And so it's hard to try to account for all the different potential stressors livestock see on the daily basis. So I think those studies are needed too. But
Yeah, it's definitely an important area for a lot of producers, not only on the sheep side, but a lot of this stuff I know you're doing in the sheep but it's a good model for other livestock in the cow calf industry as well. So I wouldn't focus that this is a sheep project. I think there's a lot of application, and you know there's a lot of cool studies on the fish side on generational effects, and they get to see turnover rates much quicker than we do. And that's the challenge, right? Is I don't know when you started this study, but I'm sure it was probably started several years ago. And it takes forever to get to the point where collecting data sometimes.
yeah. And part of that, like you said, is the nature of how we're evaluated, but also how funding is allocated. It's hard to get those multi-year studies where you're not going to find answers for a couple of years. So we try to put some projects in there along the way. But this is, I think, year 3 of this study, and I'm hoping we're done this year. So hopefully, I have some cool findings to share soon.
Nice. Well, we'll be looking forward to seeing some of those come out, and seeing the impacts.
Me too.
So within that, you use a lot of undergraduates for your research, and I know you do the calving school or the class for Colorado State. Is so from your aspect, I think it's great that undergrad students get embracing research early on.
Hmm.
I know when I was undergrad, that was not happening, and so that was a long time ago. And I've seen that here at Oregon State as well. As I've got quite a few undergraduates that want to do research, want to be part of research, and they want that hands-on and learn earlier on. And so, how are you embracing undergraduates and the benefits you're seeing for them in not only your calving class, but also in your research?
So I went to undergraduate at California State University Chico, which has a university farm, and all when I was there, all the labs for animal science classes were on the farm. And I think when I was deciding which school to go to, that was a big factor. I considered it needed a farm, and then I ended up at Nebraska, which has research stations but no on-campus farm per se, and here at CSU it's somewhat similar. And so I think when I got here, I thought about how impactful that experience was for me as an undergraduate. That's what turned me away from veterinary school, and didn't leave me flailing for what are my other options. So I just really wanted to find a source of that here at Colorado State. Gets a bit confusing when I say CSU because that means Chico to me, but it's Colorado State here. Um, so yeah, when I got here, I bought my own flock of sheep to start doing some preliminary studies, and I had 1 or 2 grad students and said, "This isn't going to be enough. We're going to work ourselves to the bone trying to take care of all these animals and do the research and have them take classes and teach classes." And so it just started small, with a couple of undergraduates, and then our college actually funds an undergraduate research fellow. And from there, a lot of it was word of mouth, or if you want to learn, a lot of these students are still targeting vet school. They need the hands-on experience, not just the theory, they need the practice. And so it's just grown over the years, and it's probably one of the most rewarding parts of my job. I love getting to be out there and share my passion with them and see them find new passions and or refine their passion. So I think right now we have 35 undergraduates that are involved in every aspect of the research. That's from feeding the animals to health checks to collecting blood. And some of them take on their own research projects and present those on campus or at national meetings for undergraduate research. Some of them have become my graduate students after that. And so I just think that experiential learning needs to be incorporated anywhere we can.
Yeah, it's just not in, the research component is they're asking for that in their classes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you see the increased percentage of students coming into animal science programs that do not come from an ag background,
Mm-hmm.
which is great because they get exposed to it, that they actually learn about agriculture and want to be part of agriculture, but they don't necessarily have some of those hands-on that we did coming in of this is normal.
Yeah. And I think it's a low stakes environment for them to learn, right? We don't want to
It
send them
is.
into postgraduate jobs and them have to learn the hard way there. We want to let them make the mistakes here and have the chance to get the skill that will make them more competitive when they graduate, and for people to want Colorado State students to come work for them because they know they have that piece.
Yeah, definitely builds those skill sets. I know, a lot of vet schools require some kind of a research, being part of research programs. And so that's a big part of a lot of vet programs is that these students have to have some sort of research background.
Yeah.
And for a lot of students that want to go to grad school, it provides that opportunity of getting their foot in the door, learning what we learned as master's students. They get to learn in undergrad, and so they just make a better student going through these programs because you're not training them once they get into a master's program. They're already know somewhat of what they're going to do or how to do things, so it makes that part a lot more streamlined.
A lot less challenging, I think. Into graduate or veterinary school, there's already a sharp learning curve. And so if you're not also trying to acquire basic animal handling skills or management skills, just lightens that load a little bit.
Yeah, and it provides those students that don't have that background
Mm-hmm.
to see things they wouldn't see, because I've been around a lot of vet students that or even vets that didn't have the background and were making recommendations that were not necessarily the greatest recommendations.
Yep.
And it was a book recommendation versus a practical production if you had experience recommendation.
Yes.
And so I think it helps from that aspect as well, as we're setting these students up to be better vets for livestock producers by doing this.
Yeah, I think it's less about than the book telling them or a guess of what producers need, and it's more about a practical experience to say I've been in it and I've seen the challenges, and not everything that is in the textbook is going to work out on the ranch.
So how have you incorporated this in some of your other courses that you've taught as well?
Yeah, so the calving and calf care class that you mentioned is purely experiential learning. It's for seniors and it's scaffolded in a way that we talk about calving, but then the majority of it, they're out calving, either at our local experiment station or I send out to cooperative ranches with some local producers that like to have students out, Beef Improvement Center and our Eastern Colorado Research Center. And so that one is fun for me because I think, like you're mentioning, we get a lot of students that are not from an ag background and have never actually been on a working cattle ranch. And so I send them up to Saratoga, Wyoming, and they realize how far they are from the nearest town and what their resources are. And they have to critically think and problem solve and freeze. And really, I think just a weekend up there is huge in the experiential learning and the understanding of everything they've been working towards with an animal science degree. So I incorporate that there. They can also be involved in lambing. And the goal is actually the beginning of the semester, we talk about it. We have a dystocia simulator that we use to practice correcting. I send them to those ranches with supervised calving. And then by the end of the semester, they're calving out our local cow herd independently. At least that's the goal. And so that they have that practical skill when they're done and they're not just saying, I read about it in the book, I actually have done it. I try to incorporate that to a lesser extent in the other courses I teach. The other ones I teach are pretty large lecture courses like physiology and reproductive physiology. So not super practical to get them out on the farm all the time. So I implement case studies in that case to try to get them still thinking scenario on the farm. I pull in industry people, I pull in producers to talk to them about what their challenges are, how they might do things on their operation, and then we sit in class and talk about it.
Oh, it's tremendous. And just that hands-on of, sending students to middle of nowhere, even for a week, you see so much growth out of them. As long as they're willing to, accept it and go and just jump full in, you see so much growth in students by putting them out where they have to make decisions, where they don't have, someone there to kind of push them along. You just see a tremendous amount of growth and learning and ability that comes out of that.
Yeah, I think students are really good at, reading material or having material presented to them and regurgitating it on an exam. And when you put them in a real life scenario, they don't know how to use that same information and apply it. And so that's kind of my overarching teaching philosophy is I don't want you to tell me the information, I want you to use it. And so that creates challenges as an instructor, but it's really rewarding when they reach that goal.
You can always look stuff back up in a book, but if you don't have the ability to do it, what you look up does not matter.
Yes.
And so that's always got me with classes is no matter what you teach, they can always go back and look at it. But if they don't come away with the ability for anything from your class, then what was the point of them memorizing words and have no ability?
Yeah, you can tell me what dystocia is, but do you know how to handle it, fix it, get a live calf on the other end? Yeah, those are the big conversations I think need to happen, especially as we're getting those students that are going to come from less of a background so that we can all be on an even playing field at the end of their degree.
So are you seeing a change in the culture within the department of wanting to increase these hands-on opportunities? How can we redevelop our classes? I know when I was undergrad, there was no hands-on. We didn't do hands-on.
Ugh, that's such a bummer.
And for larger schools, that's even tougher, right? With large departments of, 1,000 undergrads, that gets very tough to do some of these.
Yeah.
For smaller programs like Chico is a great example of the ability to have hands-on. You have the farm right there. But for larger schools, and CSU would be at some of those, larger, how do you adopt that across all your courses to provide this increased experience for students, because that's what they want is the experience.
Yeah, CSU is right there at that 1,000 student and growing actually enrollment, and so I do think these are critical conversations we're having. I obviously personally I've been trying to incorporate them for as long as I've been here, but other faculty absolutely you're starting to see changes in the way that they're conducting their courses to try to meet those demands and to meet the new student. We came out of COVID with a different student, different needs, and trying to adapt to that. So you're seeing increases. And if we can't be on the farm for labs, then we're going to go on field trips to local production systems, to dairies, to processing facilities, to feedlots. So at minimum that you're seeing more creative course design, creative teaching methods like case studies or problem-based learning, things that are actually getting students to work with the material, assessing knowledge differently. It's no longer, I wouldn't say it's no longer, it's still there, but less and less just rote memorization exams to assess student knowledge. We have a lot of actual teaching studies going on too to see where these are being effective and where we might do better. And something I think we're actually focusing on currently too is extracurricular involvement. I think across the US, from colleagues I've talked to in other animal science programs, there's just a steady decline in involvement in extracurriculars, and why is not super clear.
Yep.
So we're doing some survey work starting here, and we'll branch out after that to try to understand the barriers to that, because I think that is something that absolutely could help fill gaps in the hands-on learning that you're talking about.
That's a interesting point of this extracurricular stuff that they don't want to do is they don't want to be in clubs. And it's interesting as you see over time, this has changed. And, when I was an undergrad, we didn't have, we didn't have cell phones. So there wasn't a lot to do outside of, a club or groups. But students today, they come in, whether or not it's social media, whatever it is they don't want to necessarily be involved in clubs outside of their coursework. And that's really tough.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to consider about the barriers. Is it financial barriers? A lot of students have to hold jobs and to support themselves. Is it when clubs meet? I think a lot of it is we have to attach value to the extracurricular, whether that is credit or something they can put on a resume or put on their vet application, and make it fun. At the end of the day, no one wants to sit through another lecture as a volunteer.
Well, and some of it may be is you go in, you may not know anyone, and so you join clubs to get to know people, have
Yeah,
friends,
community.
etc.
Hmm.
And that may be a less of a focus today of they may be coming in with friends or etc. But how do we change that structure where we can get kids more involved, be part of the departments in whatever capacity? And it may be not have clubs, but how can we get them more involved?
Yeah, I think the first question is why are they not? And so that's what I'm trying to tackle right now. I'll let you know what I find, but how do we remove those barriers so that they come back and feel a sense of community in their department, in their degree program, and then get some of those industry connections and hands-on experiences?
Well, Caitlin, to wrap us up, did we miss anything that you want to touch on or go back around to?
I don't think so. Do you need to know anything about me?
I think we're good.
I'm not a sheep expert. I come from a cattle background.
So, well, Caitlin, thank you for jumping on the show. Really good stuff. I think that the teaching aspect is something we don't discuss enough in academia, especially us researchers. And so I think that's a very important part of the conversation of developing the next generation as students, of making sure our departments are fitting those needs, because this generation is totally different than our last generation. And their needs and their desires are totally different. And sometimes we view it as how I went to school or how my school was. And that's sometimes a challenge for us is they're different and we can't do that. Well, Caitlin, again, thank you. A lot of good stuff. And I'm sure our viewers would really appreciate a lot of the insight, especially from the academia side.
It's time for our famous three. Your cattle are constantly threatened by the exposure of mycotoxins in feed. Now you can know if mycotoxins are present in your feed and what you should do about it. DSM Firmenich offers a range of analytical services to assess the mycotoxin contamination and solutions to combat mycotoxins. Don't let mycotoxins contaminate your performance. Visit dsmfirmenich.com/mycotoxin-survey to learn more. That's dsm-firmenich.com/mycotoxin-survey.
So to wrap this up, we've got our three optional questions. The first one is, what is your go-to beef, I guess sheep, related resource that you highly recommend someone utilizing?
Yeah, I think my resource is the same, whether it's beef, sheep, equine, whatever. I think you got to talk to the people that are actually in it. First and foremost, producers, people actually out there, boots on the ground doing the work. And if you can't get in touch with people, I think I probably frequent extension publications most after that, because that's kind of my link to industry. When I can't be out there, I know I have great colleagues here and at other universities that are out there working with producers and can give me the answers I'm looking for if I don't have them myself.
No, extension is a tremendous resource that not only producers but non-extension faculty should be utilizing to help them, not only for the classes but their researches. Where should I be taking this? Where is the biggest needs for our producers?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is a non-ag related or not ag book that you highly recommend someone reading?
I have to admit that I'm not a great reader after spending my days on a computer. That's not normally my first habit, but I think some that have stuck with me are a couple from Brene Brown, actually, like
Yep.
Daring Greatly, and I think the other one's Rising Strong, which is really just about how to overcome challenges and pick yourself up when you've been knocked down. Because I think academia for sure and the livestock industry, agriculture will humble you, and you got to be able to move past that and keep trudging forward. So I think those books have some great themes around that.
No, that's a really good point, and definitely we all got big challenges to overcome every day, and so it's how we deal with those challenges. All right. Lastly, what sets apart a successful beef professional from someone that isn't?
I guess in the same vein as what I just mentioned, tenacity, being able to keep pushing, perseverance, persistence. And I think in today's day and age, maybe to wrap up our conversation, is ingenuity. I don't think we have to lay down the idea that just because we've always done it that way, that's the best way to do it, and come up with new ideas and new opportunities for some pretty big challenges we're facing in agriculture. So I think those two, and then be kind. People are going to want to work with you if you're kind first. No one's going to want to work with the grumpy person.
That is true. Well, great insight. I really appreciate those comments.
Thank you.